On December 20th, 1986, one day after the release of Kid Icarus and 2 days after the release of King Kong 2, the now defunct DB Soft released a maze action game for the Famicom that was heavily inspired by a series of Japanese light novels known as Dirty Pair. While this game doesn't quite reach the heights of Dirty Pair, it did manage to score a 26 out of 40 in the 14th issue of Weekly Famitsu. And 3 out of the 4 reviewers even remarked on the cuteness of the main character in their notes. In some ways they were saying, it's not very good, but she's cute. It's Layla for the family computer, and it's the first game I didn't manage to get complete in box.
Sir, the trouble consultants from the 3WA are here, sir.
We're the lovely angels.
Hello, gentlemen.
The Dirty Pair.
For being a maze action game, Layla really isn't that complex in terms of navigation or gameplay. Basically, Layla is a side-scrolling platformer with shooting, and because of that, it draws some easy surface-level comparisons to Metroid. Structurally though, the game actually has a lot more in common with Super Mario Bros., but with guns. Like Mario, you cannot move backwards within a level in Layla, and it's not a single interconnected world like in Metroid, but rather a series of different levels. Simply put, it's a game where you make your way from point A to point B, where point A is always to the left of point B. That's not to say the game is totally boring though. It does do interesting things with the shooting, and the weapon variety and physics are definitely where Layla shines, but I'll get more into the specifics of that after I establish a better idea of what your objectives are and how the game is structured. In Layla, you play as Layla, and your main objective is to put a stop to the plans of the outcast engineer, Shinokov Manitoka. Manitoka possesses access to what the manual describes as a dangerous weapon and is hell-bent on using said weapon to commit crimes against humanity. There is a catch, however. The weapon requires passwords that are encrypted on 8 different floppy disks in order to work. And at some point prior to the events of this game, Shinokov, who at the time possessed all the disks required to activate the weapon, decided to instead scatter the floppies across 8 different asteroid fortresses. So already this plot has me asking questions, which is admittedly demanding a little bit more of me than I'm used to, but not really in a good way. Anyway, as Layla, you and your partner Iris are tasked with locating the disks and capturing Shinokov in order to prevent him from using the deadly weapon. Also, before the game begins, your partner Iris is apprehended and you have to rescue her as well in order to beat the game. The story kind of doesn't make sense, but it doesn't really matter. Layla as a game is divided into 8 different levels referred to as asteroids, and each asteroid is comprised of 2 main sections. The asteroid itself, which presents a rocky aesthetic filled with aliens, and the asteroid fortress, which has robotic enemies inside and a metallic high-tech aesthetic. In each fortress, Layla is required to locate and collect one of the 8 floppy disks required to activate Manitoka's weapon, and each fortress also concludes with a boss fight. In between asteroids, there are also bonus stages that take place that have Layla hopping on a space jet and blasting enemies in a space shooter style. These segments are pretty unnecessary though, as they only really result in points. But they are nice visually and are a positive inclusion overall because they space out the main content of the game. And it contributes to this idea that you're moving from one asteroid to another. The cave asteroid portions leading up to the fortress are usually pretty straightforward. It's just moving left from the cave entrance to the fortress entrance on the right. They do sometimes present you with challenges though that make you have to think, but only a little bit. There are warp zones occasionally without any indicator, and there are sometimes blocks that you will have to either shoot or headbutt in order to make it through. There are gaps as well that you can fall in, and each cave portion also has a secret hidden elevator that leads to an area that usually contains a hint on how to get through the following fortress area. I think I only found 2 in my playthrough though, and I appreciate them because I love hidden areas in games. And when you're playing a title like Layla, you have to wonder how many people have ever even set virtual foot in some of these spaces. You'll also typically find an abundance of crates in these pre-fortress segments, which contain everything from weapons to ammo to the occasional health. Most of your health though is required from shooting and killing enemies, and it's represented in the form of cakes and ice cream cones, a variety of sweets and pastries. In the earlier asteroids, these will drop after defeating any enemy, but in the later stages they only drop every other enemy you defeat. The fortress sections are where the maze portion of the game takes place, and it's done in kind of an unfun way. Horizontal floors and elevators that take you to other horizontal floors. It's not always clear where the elevators are going to take you, and there isn't a map system, but you will usually know or have a general idea of where you're at because there are markings on the walls inside of each fortress that'll tell you like what floor or what basement level you're on. But since you never know where an elevator is going to take you, there's a lot of trial and error. In the early asteroids, the fortresses really aren't bad at all. It's only a few later ones that are annoying. But even then, it's harder to get lost here than in the dungeon crawling segments in Ganbare Goemon. The boss fights usually involve cycling through your weapon arsenal to find an effective match. Typically, the axe is the strongest, but some of the bosses are actually invulnerable to the axe. Usually, I'd stick to the pistol and the main stages since it had unlimited ammo, and I would save my special weapons for the bosses. The game also utilizes a password system to save your progress, but it's a real pain to enter the characters. You have to cycle through each one a single character at a time. Luckily though, as long as your instance of Layla is still running, you can press select on the title screen and it will automatically input your most recent password for you. What's also cute is that the manual has little slots so that you can write down your password if you manage to get the manual, which you probably didn't because it's $250 complete in box. You can move between the different asteroids and go back to them if you missed the floppy disks the first time, but I would recommend just starting over if you reach the boss without the floppy. Supposedly the game won't give you a passcode if you beat the level without a floppy, but I always got the floppy before beating the levels, so I can't really confirm that. Iris, your partner, also changes things up a bit. You have to rescue her in the 5th asteroid fortress or you cannot damage the final boss. And once you do, the game actually feels a little less lonely. It's really nice aesthetically having a companion. She basically just mirrors your movements though, and even hurts you in some ways since you're using twice the ammunition you would without her. And I'm not 100% on this, but it seemed like sometimes she would get hit and I would still take damage. You would think that, you know, she wouldn't cause you to take extra damage too, because then it's just like a really big hindrance, but I digress. Regarding the physics though, the physics aren't the best. Actually, I find the jumping and running to be very floaty, but still satisfactory because it makes sense within the low gravity theme. I also like how fast you can get Layla moving, but the game does have one physics related decision that is pretty much unforgivable, and that is the amount of time it takes Layla to turn around. With how fast the enemies move and how most tend to track you from any direction, it is really annoying that you have to come to a full stop before being able to turn around. And that is probably Layla's biggest hiccup to me. If you could switch back and forth really fast like you can in most of these games, I think it would really improve the gameplay. And I usually don't bring this up, but price. This game commands quite the price tag. And I think it mostly has to do with the fact that there are anime girls on it. It's certainly not due to the quality of the game. I can tell you that. Not to get too deep into my actual thoughts though just yet, but it does demonstrate the power of anime girls when it comes to long-term value. And as far as length, How Long to Beat says that it takes around 3 hours to beat Layla. In my experience, it was more like 5 to 6, maybe seven or so hours. I also had to do it in chunks because the game had several moments where it would just frustrate me to the point of wanting to take a break, and that was okay because of the password system, but then it was kind of annoying to have to enter that. It's not too difficult, but there are moments for sure where if you're not patient, you're going to have to prepare for salt. For the Famicom, comparatively, it's really not too bad. What's funny though is for the first time I actually clicked on the reviews tab on how long to beat for this game, and I clicked on it on accident, I think. But when I was reading through it, there was only one review. And I don't usually do this, but it was so succinct and accurate, I felt the need to mention it. Exhuminator says, takes a lot of influence from Dirty Pair and Metroid, screws all that up with terrible physics and unfair game design, somehow manages to be charming despite that. Not the worst Famicom platformer, far from the best. If you want to turn aliens into ice cream and ride space bikes through space, this is your ticket. Short version, I pretty much agree. Long version, you have to mention more about the weapon systems to really grasp it.
Firmly grasp it!
So with that, let's take a look at the weapons. The first main weapon is the pistol. This is kind of like in Cave Story, your Polar Star. It never runs out of ammo, you don't have to worry about it, and it's kind of like your most solid, reliable weapon in the game. Some things are unaffected by the pistol, but for the most part, it's just your standard pea shooter. The machine gun is especially powerful against bosses and for breaking destructible blocks in Layla. It runs out of ammo extremely fast though, especially once Irish joins up. The hand grenades were my favorite weapon to use in the game because the bouncing physics on those were really impressive for a Famicom game, and it was really fun to just lob them over things. And then every time you made direct contact with an enemy, they would explode on contact. So a lot of fun using the grenades. They were super clutch. The flamethrower is like a closer, slower moving projectile than the machine gun, and it kind of like caps out at a certain length rather than firing all the way across the screen. I used this probably more than the machine gun, but that's usually just because I was saving the ammo for the machine gun, because it's a little bit better. The throwing axe is generally not very good against regular enemies. You really are just saving those for the bosses, because if it works against a boss, you're going to be able to kill him in like 1 to 5 hits. And it kind of works similar to the axe in Ghosts and Goblins. The bazooka is like a faster firing version of your pea shooter, but you can't shoot as many at a time because it goes all the way across the screen, but it does move across the screen a little bit faster. I actually really did like the bazooka, and I liked the way that the sprite looked when Layla was holding the bazooka. And it is really cool how the sprite changes for each weapon so much. You know, like certain games in this era, like you're changing your armor or your weapon and it's just your standard sprite still. But Layla does do good in that department by changing it up. Then you've got the beam saber, which is probably my least used weapon in this game. It doesn't stop when you hit an enemy, it will go through and continue hitting the other enemies. And it's useful in some segments where like I was running low on other things. That's kind of the only reason I switched to it. And it looks cool, the sprite does, but overall it's just kind of underwhelming. The barrier is the last real regular sort of weapon thing, and it's not even really a weapon, but it does this really cool effect that kind of reminds me of the Legend of Zelda enemies that you only find in the 8th dungeon. I forget their names. Petra something? But anyway, it basically gives you invulnerability. So it's like a Mario Star on demand. And in that sense, it's unique compared to the other implementations of the Mario Star so far. So I like that. Then I guess this kind of counts as a weapon. It's in between an item and a weapon. There's a question mark. Sometimes they give you health, but other times it gives you a use of something called a special option. Layla does something cool where you can shift between your weapons by pressing the select button, but you can also press start and then hit the select button, and it allows you to, without taking any time off the game, sort through and pick which one you want with a cursor. But you'll notice there's also a little tiny arrow, and if you press the A button, it will switch the direction of that arrow. That is not used for any of the weapons except for the special option, and you can also only select the special option by pressing start first to select your weapons. It's not in your regular switching. The arrow indicates the effect that you're going to get from the special option. If the arrow's on the top left, it damages every enemy on screen. If it's in the top right, all the crates on screen are destroyed. The bottom right means that you get 1,000 points, and the bottom left means it destroys all of the destroyable terrain. And all of these have the same cost. it cuts your health. It's not really worth using for the most part, but if you're stuck in a place with a lot of destructible things and you're trying to navigate your way through, it is helpful because there's something we'll talk about a little bit later, a little tornado that comes and damages you if you take too long. So if you're taking too long standing still on the screen, you get punished for it, unless you press the start button. It's like, why did they add that in? It just makes your game worse for no reason. But the only remaining items are the roller skates, which increase your speed, and then finally the password discs. And they don't really do anything except for allow you to beat the game and give you a password that you can save and then return to your game later. The weapon variety is impressive though, and if I were to pick one thing to praise Layla for, it would be the weapon system. It is fun, but since there are so many, pressing select can get annoying, especially if you miss the weapon that you meant to get to, and you have to cycle through all of them again. It's just, ugh. What's interesting about the enemies is that there's no real documentation for what their names are in English. So I translated them myself. And I do know hiragana and katakana, but I may be a little rusty. So if some of these are wrong, forgive me, but here we go. On the asteroids, you have purimus, which are slimes, supagani, which are like spider enemies that hop around on the cave tops, apara, which are eyeballs with limbs, and they jump from the ceiling to the floor and back up. Michin, which is a mole type of looking enemy. Mirako, which is a running alien man. Koan, which is an amoeba eye type of thing, and those things actually take a lot of hits. They're kind of annoying. Ben, which are bat type enemies. That's just called a Ben, like Ben. And they have this mild sine wave pattern, but they're nowhere near as bad as the typical sine wave enemies. And there's also not that many of them. Shiransu, which are fish type enemies. I thought this was funny the first time. They're like little space fish. Enbies, which are barrier beam oval waves. These actually can be destroyed. I thought that you couldn't destroy them at first. Jesseros, which are bunny alien octopi type of enemies, and they also fire projectiles. And then there were two asteroid type enemies that were unlisted as far as I could tell in the manual. The first one looks like the screaming guy from that one famous painting. They're just these kind of zombie type enemies. And then the second one, there are snake boys in this game. I'm not sure what either of these guys' names are, so maybe we could pick it if we really wanted to, I don't know. So in the fortresses though, it's all like robotic type enemies. The fortress enemies are the Pogusu, which are marching mini men, and they fire little projectiles. Beruketa, which are up and down boys. Burudora, which are faster up and down boys. Pseudo-teru, which are right to left moving sentinel looking things. They kind of look like the sentinels in Halo. Torusu, which are little robot men. Usumiru, Guramazi, Rogan, Dorugadoro, and the Tatsumaki, which is the tornado I mentioned earlier that comes to get you if you're just standing still trying to process where you want to go or what you're supposed to do. There are also enemies in the bonus segments of the game, but they're not named and they're just kind of like, Gauga type enemies. There are 8 bosses in the game, but only 5 types of bosses. In Asteroid Fortresses 1 and 6, you're going to find Bamo. In Asteroid Fortresses 2 and 4, you'll find Bato. In Asteroid Fortress 3, you'll find Asupadora. In 5, you'll find Teratabu. And in 7 and 8, you'll find Dinobaresu. I apologize if I got any of them wrong. Feel free to correct me. This is just trying to work my way through a game that has some of the least documentation I have seen on the internet. And regarding the stages, there's really not too much to say individually about them. All of the beginning parts before you make your way to the asteroid fortress, they work out pretty much the same way. They just increase the number of enemies and the number of jumps and the number of barriers. And then the fortresses, that's really where things kind of are changed up a little bit. But again, they look very samey. They changed the colors, which I appreciate. But, Fortress 1, Fortress 2, Fortress 3, these are all pretty easy. Fortress 4 gives you just a little bit more challenge. 5 is probably the second most complex, technically, if you know where you're going. And then 6 and 7 are, quite challenging, I'd say. And then 8 was kind of... It is like, I don't know. I kind of knew what to expect by 8. 8 was also really annoying though, because you have to make your way through it twice. And there are 2 floors that if you reach those floors, it's like kind of infinite. So you kind of have to start over, I think. I mean, that's what I did. But you have to make your way through and then go down an elevator if you want to get the floppy disk. And if you don't have all of the floppy disks when you go to fight the final boss, you can't even damage it at all. I think I kind of want to add like a new segment to this. Maybe I'll just have it for this specific game, but it's what I would do to make this a better game. First things first, I would fix the physics problem where you just can't change directions to shoot fast enough. Secondly, instead of only awarding bonus points for the bonus stages, I would give the player another chance to refill their ammo in case they ran out of too much of it before the next stage starts. And then lastly, I would make it so that Iris doesn't make it so you consume ammo twice as fast. And I would also make it so that she doesn't take damage when she gets hit. When you beat the game, you get this kind of nothing sort of screen where Layla talks about how she needs to lay off the ice creams. And Iris is like, and actually I'm invincible. And then it says, while Manitoka is out and about, which he does get away, there will always be danger in the galaxy. So, you know, this game never got a sequel and you're just kind of left hanging. And then it has credits. You know, not all of these games have credits, at least in the Famicom version, so that's something. And then it's just over. I don't know. I think like this game was kind of difficult for me because it's the least amount of feeling I have felt about a game so far, I think, for Retro Odyssey. It's not that bad. Like, I feel like I've played games that are objectively worse, but like, I still took away more from those experiences, I think, than I did from Layla. It's one of those games where it's just like, man, is it even worth trying? Can I, like, this sounds really harsh. I don't mean to be too harsh, but if you're going to play through some of these games, there are just so many better games to play. Layla does do a few things, like with the hidden areas and the weapon variety and the satisfying grenades that I think, it, you know, if you're just dying to try it because you think it's really cute, and it is really cute, you can. But for anyone else, first of all, no one should spend $50 on this game. $50 loose is what? And then that wasn't even counting the shipping from Japan. And complete in box, forget about it. I didn't know what to expect. And I go into these usually without almost any expectation unless it's like some legendary name. But I have to say, it didn't make me feel much. There's just not much to it. I mean, I would rate the cartridge probably. It's up there. Honestly, the cartridge, gosh, man, the text, the picture, the color, the saturation even on the label is really good on this. And then the background with the guys, Manitoka and Layla and Iris, I don't know. Something cool though, like regarding talking about upgrades, there was some indie developer or ROM hacker that found this game to be very enjoyable, at least portions of it. And this developer went on to make Iris, the Iris missions, which is like a ROM hack of this game where you play as Iris. And supposedly that's better than this game. I haven't tried it, but if you're interested in Layla, maybe try that instead, because I just feel like I can't recommend this game to almost anyone. I do like the things that it did, and I don't regret playing it, you know? I probably regret buying it, but maybe I'll have it in the next retro game giveaway. I don't know, because that's kind of all this is. It's just something cool to have with cute artwork. So overall, that's Layla. I appreciate everyone who stayed tuned and who continues to watch, as always. It just feels weird though, because this is the first game that I feel like it was just hard to have a takeaway. And it's not even necessarily like negative, it's just kind of nothing. But all that said, thanks for watching. Peace.